Okay, hi Janice. It's so nice to see you. First, I wanted to congratulate you on the publication of Eye of the Ocean, which came out with Pottersfield Press last year. It's a book that covers a really fascinating range of topics, and I definitely want to ask you about most of these, though I don't think we could possibly cover it all.
Ah,
Um,
well, I've got time. I mean, it's funny. My girlfriend is from Cape Breton, and her name's Leanne. People say you guys could talk for 5 hours about a toothbrush. So, Trini, I'm here for whatever roller coaster we're about to take. It's all good for me.
That's great. So I'll also say that we'll be talking about some intense subject matter, and I think it's worth giving a content warning to anyone watching. Um, and then we'll just dive in. So we're focusing today on writing about mental health, and that's of course one of the most prevalent themes in your book. You've taken a very positive approach to this topic with a really clear emphasis on the themes of love, hope, and empathy, which come up again and again in the stories throughout Eye of the Ocean. So, can you tell us what it means to you to write about mental health through stories of tragedy, but also survival and compassion and care?
I think that's a really excellent question. And a lot of people wonder why I do this. And I think I published my first book in kind of this series 10 years ago. So I would have started the research for that 2 years prior. So I've been in this doing these kinds of works for about 12 years now. And one of the reoccurring things, Trini, that I hear from people, and I interview people from across Canada, and I do that on purpose because obviously mental health is an issue that affects everyone. It really doesn't matter where they live, is that people feel sometimes in their journey, wherever they are in that journey, lonely or alone, or that they're the only person that's going through this. And that was a sort of a big topic of mine for me when I'm writing is I always try to connect with that one person. It's so, people often will say, well, how are your book sales going? And I honestly don't think about that. And I know people may not believe me, but I don't. When I sit at my computer to write, what I'm really trying to do is to connect with that one person who needs to know that they're not alone and that people genuinely care. And when I say care, I mean authentically. Like sometimes, and you've maybe have gone through this in your own group, someone's gone through a rough time, and people don't really know what to say to them. Sometimes just being with the person, simply the act of being with someone and actively listening to them and giving them that space and respect is good for them, is enough for them that day. So ultimately, that's what I want my books to do, is to let the people reading perhaps see themselves or others in a range of emotion that's portrayed in the books, but mainly that they know that they're not alone in the journey that they're taking.
I love that idea. I love that you're thinking about not just readers in general, but a very specific reader who has specific needs that are going to be met by this book or by any of your books.
I think it helps me stay focused. So, when I was a really young journalist, I had both interned and worked at CBC Radio specifically. And it was there at CBC Radio that I learned about the term focus as a young journalist. I went to the University of King's College, and focus was really important, as you know, in storytelling. So it's always keeping top of mind what exactly it is that you're trying to do. And I've worked at the Mount, I've taught at the Mount for 16 years part-time. I don't teach there anymore. But I used to try to teach that to my students too, because it doesn't have to be this long rambling statement. It can be, I really just want to do this. It's about this one thing. And so it does help me stay focused in the writing if I have that sort of one person. And I always feel like, and I hope I'm right, I don't know, but I feel like if I have that one person top of mind, that other people will fall in line, right? So trying to keep the connect, it's not worrying about, oh, what is it the public wants to read about today? I don't worry about any of that. right? I try to connect with the person that may be interested in the subject matter. And I know it's not subject matter for everyone. And that's why there's lots of authors in the world, and it's wonderful because there's room for all of us in the pond, right? So that's what makes the pond exciting. But for me, that one person will always be top of mind, and I'm humbled to try to do that.
I just absolutely love that. Um, so in many ways, this book is a very personal journey because it covers some of your own family history, but it also covers your process for writing the book. And then it's also about the collective experience of Haligonians, of Atlantic Canadians, and Canadians. So it becomes, in a sense, a universal narrative as well. So there's several key recent events that you address in the book. So the 2014 shooting death of 3 RCMP officers in Moncton, the 2020 mass shooting massacre in Nova Scotia, the tragic house fire in Spryfield, a suburb of Halifax in 2019 that took the lives of all 7 children of the Barho family who had recently immigrated from Syria, and the COVID-19 pandemic. That is a lot of material, and it's not even necessarily the full emphasis of the book. Can you talk about the tensions among your personal story, other people's personal stories, and then the more collective experience represented in your book?
Again, you've really taken time to think about the questions you've asked, and I'm a journalist, so to have someone be so thoughtful with their questions, it's an honor for me. Also intimidating, but an honor. I think that tackling these things is important because we have the space now to be able to try to do that and break them down. So for example, taking the Barho fire, which is a huge part of this book. My dad, my late father, Captain Janice Landry, was a firefighter with the former Halifax Fire Department for 31 years. And when I was a kid, my dad did not have PTSD or other issues. I'll say that up front, but he was a human being. And I remember this one case where I was very little, and it was near Christmas time, and Dad had come home from a fire where a child had died. And he was sitting in our kitchen table, and I could tell he wasn't himself. And later it was relayed to me that the child had died in the fire. And so that scene, that like living in that culture, because I grew up in a firefighter culture. I went to the firehouses, I went to the children's firefighter parties, I sat in the fire trucks. I knew a lot of the firefighters. They didn't have the same support systems that we have today for those people who are serving. So even when I write about veterans like my late father, you'll see that call to action for veterans who didn't have those support services. So a lot of why I tackle these extremely difficult subject matter is because we have to really put a microscope to the point that those people that are currently serving or did before need as much support and space for these discussions as we can give in a sensitive way, right? Which is why you'll see warnings in different chapters. And when I write, I try to say, if we're talking about a 911 call or a specific incident, I realize this is difficult subject matter for many people. And, they could be considered triggers for some. It's impossible really as a storyteller to eliminate all triggers to every single human being. But you can certainly try to have empathy as you're writing. Empathy for me is a huge factor in what I do. It's really maybe hope and empathy are the two biggest drives of why I do what I do. And sometimes, Trini, I still ask myself, why do I do this? Because the subject matter is so difficult. But I think that when I wrote the first book in this series, which was called The 60-Second Story, which was published by Pottersfield Press in 2013, that was detailing a rescue that my late father did of an 8-week-old baby with his peers, firefighting peers. And Dad almost died and the baby almost died. And that's why it's called The 60-Second Story, because that's literally how much time the firefighters I interviewed said it was between life and death. Why I started covering these issues really is because when I went to tell Dad's story, I tracked down every living firefighter who was at that scene. And in the course of interviewing about Dad's case and why he went on to win Canada's Medal of Bravery, they could take me back to incidents that happened in the 50s, like it was yesterday. Well, it was a foggy night. Well, it was cold and the buttons on my uniform froze, or it kind of took me off guard. It's not why I went to interview them. But when I realized that they lived with these scenes and these traumas their whole lives, they had long since retired, but they were still very much part of who they were. I thought, okay, this is a really important thing here. And so I started to slowly unpack that over the course of a decade, really. But that's where it started. And I thought about telling you this because I thought about that to myself. Why did you really get started in this? And it was by happenstance of these wonderful veterans opening up about cases that clearly they still carry with them. And the Barho case is a perfect example of that because it's so incredibly tragic that, you know, we have to still be there for the veterans, that it dredges up old cases, but the people that were at that fire scene are going to need assistance, in my opinion, and I'm no professional. But why would you assume that all of a sudden you cut help off for people? It's something that's an ongoing thing. So in my work, whether it's a local story like my dad's story or an international story like the case of the Barhos, which really was an international piece, that we really make space to try to help people that run towards the emergency when the rest of us run away.
Yeah, and it feels like the book, because there's some self-reflexivity in the book. I mean, you mention your process for interviewing people. You talk about your own position during these interviews and how you feel about it and how you're trying to capture not just what people are saying, but how they're saying it.
Yes.
I feel like it's a journey for you as well. And I wonder how much of that journey for you is a healing process.
It's again, bang on. I'll be completely frank with you. After this book came out, Eye of the Ocean, talking about my mother's death in this book, in the scene where I make the 911 call. I mean, it's been incredibly healing for me to meet the gentleman who was on the other end of that call as the emergency communicator, Jason Cochran, who is really my angel. I just can't say enough about him. And I mean, the graciousness of him, Trini, because you know, as a writer and journalist yourself, he didn't know what I was going to ask him. I mean, they don't give out interviews, first of all, as you know, very often. You don't see a lot of one-on-one. I mean, the interview I did with him was over an hour long, probably about the length that we'll do today. He had no idea what first of all, the daughter of the person who died was going to ask. My mom didn't survive. It's nobody's fault. She was in the latter stages of her life when I found her in her apartment. Let me say that so that listeners understand that. It was no one's fault. Mom was dying. But for him to sit with me for an extensive period of time and take my line of questioning so graciously, I tell people, and this is absolutely true about healing, he helped myself and my mother, and my husband was there that day too. He helped us once, the day of the 911 call, but he also helped me in my grieving process by meeting with me and helping me unpack that day, because it still remains it's one of the top 2 worst days of my life. The day my mom and dad died were the 2 worst days of my life thus far. So for him to do that, it's a hugely healing thing. But what I do want people to understand, that writing about these subject matters is extremely taxing. And I do think that this should be taught more in journalism schools, working around trauma, listening to trauma. It's a subject matter I tackled in my book, The Legacy Letters, that there's all kinds of professions that are on the periphery of trauma, right? Like tow truck drivers, people who work on bridges. I could go on and on and on. Medical examiner staff, social workers, that these people also need training, preemptive training before they go into these roles, because working around trauma for years and years and listening and taking in trauma is really difficult. And so after I did the publicity for Eye of the Ocean, which was like, heading into Christmas of 2022, I became very sick. And I was run down, and I'll say burnt out, but it was just emotionally taxing to go over and over the 911 call of my mom dying. And I think I was I should have known. I mean, I write about this stuff, huh? So perhaps I should take my own advice, but now I know better. I mean, I wasn't that sick, but I definitely was, I had at that point, like, I need to take a break. So I talked to my husband, Rob, about that. And, I've tactfully decided this year during 2023 that I'm not working on a book right now. I have 2 ideas, and they're fighting for space up there, and which one's coming to the front of the burner and which one's going to be on the back burner. And I kind of know where the next one is going, but I'm on purpose not doing it right now, which is the first time, because really, if you look at all these books, it's like every 2 years, every 2 to 3 years, one came out. Well, it means that you're starting one or you're working on 2 at a time. And it's a lot, right? Anybody who writes long format will tell you the editing and research, and it's a ton of work. So it's interesting for me. It's like, maybe she finally grew up or something. She finally got it, because I feel I have no guilt about it. And in the past, I would have, well, you got to be working on some project. I freelance, right, as a writer and producer. So I have other work. It's not like I don't just write books. I mean, we have bills to pay, and we have a child and everything else. So I do multiple things as writers often do. But I tell people this story because I want them to learn from me that writing about difficult subject matter is hard on the writer too.
It definitely is. And I fully got that sense reading the book, was that I could feel you processing this whole experience of writing the book in those self-reflexive passages, while I was also reading other people's stories. And so I feel like it's not just about other people's stories. It's this personal journey for you too. And I really enjoyed that. And I really appreciated it, because authors don't always insert themselves into their subject matter when it's nonfiction, right? And I really appreciated that you did that.
Well, people have asked me about why I approach work the way I do. And a couple of things. I ask people some very difficult questions, right? And people, for some reason, over the years, open up to me. And sometimes the things they tell me are things they've never told anyone else before. And they know it's for a public format. They know who I am and what I do. And so that's a huge responsibility first, huge. And that weighs on me, like to the point where you can, before a piece comes out, I almost physically get sick over it. It's like, oh my God, I hope I don't disappoint anyone. I mean, it's massive. And I think anyone who does this sort of work will agree, they will get it right away. But because I do ask people to tackle some difficult things, I feel that it's only right that I do that too. Why should I be the person that throws all this stuff out there, but then never have to admit that I've had a difficult time, or, walk through some of this with the reader, right? And so I've had a lot of people say to me, we do appreciate that. It's not something they're used to seeing from a journalist, but because you have to be sort of like a brick wall or something. But I mean, even so, today we realize that journalists who are covering, war crimes or whatever they're doing, they're human beings, right? So there's more of talk of preemptive resiliency training and all of these things that when I trained a long time ago, I graduated in 87, right? I'm dating myself here. I really don't even care anymore. I've earned all the gray hair I have. but there was no talk of any of this. And I do think it's extremely important because we can't just stick our head in the sand. You know, one of the sayings you see in that book is, when we know better, we have to do better. And we do know. That's a big call to action in that book. When we know better, we have to do better. So I actually turn that on myself too. And that's one of the reasons that you see some of that in the books.
Absolutely. And it's refreshing, because it does give the reader the sense that you're self-aware enough to realize that this is impacting you at the same time that it's impacting all the other people who feature in the book, which is,
True.
I think, wonderful. I wanted to ask you if you can tell us why it was important to you to write a book that deals with these various topics, ranging from, you know, collective tragedies that impact huge communities, the people who are trying to contribute to the healing process for these collective tragedies, and the sort of broader impact of mental health issues in general.
I think that, you know, my big thing is offering hope, right? So when I meet, so I started going to conferences back when I was early on in the books. My mother, my late mother, Teresa Landry, had this doctor, the late Dr. Lauren Marr. She was a well-known GP here in Halifax who died not that long ago, and he was really beloved. He had a peer who had started this group called the Tema Foundation, and his name's Dr. Howard Conter. Dr. Conter and his family started the Tema Foundation, which is national in Canada, which supports first responders, military, veterans, and their families. You know, I started by meeting them. And so when you start to write about mental health issues in Canada, you'll realize quickly that there's a very tight-knit group of people that go to a lot of events, that meet each other and know each other. So I started through the Tema Foundation and Dr. Conter and family. When I went to the Toronto conference for the Tema Foundation, they have fundraising gala and conference, I spoke there. And there was a gentleman there, John Garth McDonald, who's a paramedic from Antigonish, and he started a group called Helping the Helpers. And they have a yearly conference at St. Yvette's, which I'm going to this year. And I was at the Tema Foundation one at Pier 21. So it's really finding that network of people and just seeing that they're just everyday wonderful people that have come together, taking whatever gifts they've been given to try to help other people. And it was just the most organic, natural thing it really just started from my mom's late doctor saying, you really have to talk to Dr. Conter about the Tema Foundation. And then it was many years. Now we're talking years of work. This isn't a month or weeks. It's a decade plus. And also getting out there. So I think it's one thing to be, do the armchair narrative, but I like going out to see people. So for me in my job, my favorite thing has always been sitting with someone or doing what we're doing here, because Zoom has been extremely important since COVID and beyond. So I think that when you see the connectivity between people trying to help other people, that is extremely humbling and motivating. And that's really been it really sort of fed the fuel for the fire for me, was meeting these two groups of people from the Tema Foundation and Helping the Helpers. And this is a network of people across Canada who regularly go to the conferences. These are some of the top researchers in Canada into these issues. And I've been lucky enough to interview and meet many of them. Some of them I now consider to be friends of mine. And, it's wonderful because it also, so for example, with John Garth and his conference and other people here doing amazing work, like Dr. Alan Abbas at Dalhousie University, who's a leading expert on emotions and globally. I mean, we're really on the map here in Atlantic Canada and the Maritimes for all the incredible research and work that's being done. And it's literally just but the people are so, Trini, they're so devoted to it. It's mind-boggling, really. And so it's just all these little cogs in the wheel all coming together, making this big impact. Now, having said that, I think we have made great ground since I started this 10, 12 years ago, but stigma is still a huge, huge thing. And, you know, I've seen this in the wider group that I personally know, and I've seen it through my research and people I've interviewed and just, you know, just word on the street, etc. And, you know, there's still a lot of work to be done. So I don't want people to think it's all running through fields of daisies, because it's far from that. Mental health is a very, very complex issue that, you know, takes years and years to unpack. So I'm far from done. Just because I'm taking a break this year, it's just, I just need a minute. I just need a minute. But, you know, I'm not going anywhere. But in the meantime, I know all these wonderful people are out there, and I still go and support all the stuff. But yeah, it's just the unification of individuals truly committed to this it's humbling.
And it's so clear in the book that it is a collective, right? That there are these collectives, various groups, various organizations that are contributing to the process of supporting, advocating for, and helping to heal, mainly first responders and military personnel, but also the broader public, right? It's wonderful. One of the book's epigraphs is a quote by the Halifax-based Imam Hamza Mangera, and he attributes the lines to Nelson Mandela, and he used this quotation in his speech at the funeral for the 7 Barho children. So the quotation is, "Life is so short, there isn't enough time to love. I don't know where people find the time to hate." This is a really powerful statement, and it's spoken by an imam whose community has just suffered an intense loss. Can you talk about the significance of that quotation?
Yeah, so I remember during the time of the fire, I was actually working for Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency as the editor of their Feedline magazine. I was out of the province at the time of the fire, so I was not personally here in the immediate, say, 2 to 3 days after, but then I happened to be on vacation with my family in Quebec. Came back to, and of course there was a massive fallout that went on forever, you know, the funeral and all kinds of things that went on, and just the public support, you know, like little children drawing photos and people dropping food off to fire stations and helping the Syrian community. It was incredible, the empathy, the outpouring of empathy. And that is really one of the reasons why empathy was one of the key themes in Eye of the Ocean, is the empathy that was shown to people, Nova Scotians, specifically after the Barho fire. When I heard that quote, I actually read it on social media. That quote went viral. It was shared like thousands and thousands of times. So people clearly connected with, and it resonated. It hit home at a really, really, really dark time. And as soon as I saw that quote, and I mean this, it was just like, you know, I just knew that the quote was going to be in my next piece. And I knew that love would be one of the themes. So the book before this was Silver Linings. And that was a book that had gratitude as its main theme. So using gratitude to build our resiliency. And I don't mean you're grateful for it's sunny today. I mean, finding gratitude when things are really tough, which is hard to do. It really, really is hard to do. And we've all gone through hard things. And there's some days it's just like there's just no room for gratitude, it feels like, right? I just can't do it. And that's okay too. That's okay. I want to talk about that too. Remind me to talk about the whole being strong. You don't always have to be strong, right? It's okay. But I'll come back to that. When the imam said that, I thought, okay, for sure, this is huge. People need to hear this message. What I also loved was that his community had really taken some hate online, right? Because there's always people who love to hate, and but love always wins, right? And you could see it as soon as he said it. And when I interviewed him, the two imams that led the funeral, which they were incredibly gracious to give the interview, and I don't know of anyone else who obtained a very as in-depth of an interview where they went really, really deep into this. That he actually said that he knew that quote would be part of his funeral speech, but he was actually still putting the speech together at the back of the place for the funeral, which is at the the former Kennard Center, because they didn't have a mosque large enough. They've realized that there were so many people invested that didn't know the family, right? Again, they were refugees. There were thousands of people who attended. So, you know, just even the thousands of people who came to try to support the family is in such a horrible tragedy is beautiful. It's, you know, people can just by their very presence make a difference. And they told me it did for the family. And that was our only, just to, you know, make this public, that was our only agreement prior to the interview, is that I would not ask about how the father and mother were doing, because it's private medical information. And as you know, ethically, you can't just go around sharing someone's medical information without their consent. So they said, you can ask us absolutely anything, but just don't ask us how they're doing. And I agreed to that. And we were very, very careful to make sure that their privacy wasn't breached. Obviously, it was a very difficult, emotional interview. But what was amazing to me was towards the end of the interview, and this was shortly before the bell rang out for their evening prayer session, getting close to that, Imam Manjera, who said the love quote, said, you know, Janice, I want you to hear something. And we're sitting in this little room, and it's just the two of them and me. And he takes out his smartphone and he's, you know, dialing around on the smartphone. And I have no idea what he's going to do here. So I just sit, I say absolutely nothing. And he goes to the Rick Howe, the former Rick Howe's talk show. Rick is now retired, a very popular talk show here in Halifax. And Rick had this quote as part of his show one day, and all these callers called in. And this one man called in and said, you know, this changed my whole outlook on life. My wife and I were listening. We heard this quote. When we heard this from the funeral, we just couldn't believe how it's so true. It's so important. You know, we are so grateful we heard it. And the imam actually carries this exchange on his phone. So it obviously means a lot to him that members of the public were touched in such a deep way by this love quote. So, you know, it does give you faith in humanity that when things are really bad, because honestly, in my lifetime, that was the worst fire we've gone through. I did talk about another historical fire in the book, but that was not during my lifetime. Although I do know that some of my dad's peers would have been at that fire. There was another fire where a number of children died in Spryfield as well. So I commend them for having the graciousness to openly discuss the planning of that funeral. And I can't imagine, I truly can't imagine the weight of the responsibility of organizing that, of making sure that their faith system was represented properly and that it could be understood for everybody else too. That this, as you said, the word collective, I feel is a very important word in our interview today, collectivity as well in the grieving and healing process, because it really did affect everybody.
And that interview with those two imams is just, it's so touching. They say things that surprised me.
Me too.
They talk about how much responsibility they felt, not just towards their own Muslim community, but the broader community in Halifax and in Canada. But they also talk about how much they could handle. And I'm forgetting his name, but the other imam basically said, like, I knew I couldn't be involved in the washing of the bodies because it was too much for me. I already had too much going on. And I just thought that is a fascinating and touching and really amazing thing to admit, that even in his role as a faith leader in the Muslim community, he knew where his limits were, and he had to set some boundaries around what his role was within the community.
That's Imam Abdullah Yusri, and he was the person who was the go-between. And to put some perspective on that, he was the person who was the go-between with the mother, right? So the father would have been not be able to communicate because his health was so poor in the immediate days and weeks after. He was in really bad shape. So this Imam Yusri was the one that was dealing with the mom. Well, you can only imagine the scene, right? I mean, and again, we were very careful not to go into anything that would breach confidentiality or privacy for her, which was really important for me because I'm not there. I'm there to try to show people that whether someone's Muslim or whatever their religious, whether they have a religious affiliation or not, or whatever, they're people like the rest of us, right? And they're hurting too. And I think that they handled the whole thing with such, like, I don't know who else could really do this at the level that they did. And I admired him greatly because he had so much responsibility of dealing with the mother and then her family members who came over in several lots, right? If you remember, the Canadian government federally was working to bring her family over to help support her at this incredibly difficult time, which they did. So he was involved in all that, which is hugely important. And then Imam Manjira was at the time was the person who led all the, they now have two, but at the time was the sole person who was the chief person of leading all the funerals, which include wrapping and washing of the bodies. So they have their teams that do that, and it's specific protocol. So, you know, and the other one was working with the mother and the wider family. So you can understand why, you know, to do things well, you have to have a protocol system in place. And I thought it was incredibly important what he said, because whether you're an imam or whoever you are, you have things that happen in your life that you have to say to yourself, whoa, like I can see that if I'm going to be of help to someone in my family, in my circle, I have to focus on this. Because if I'm trying to do this over here right now, I'm going to water it down, which isn't doing it any service. And I'm called to do this right now. So what they said is really important, whether you do what they do or not. And I think it's a really, really important learning. I hope people reread that chapter. And honestly, I still think about that interview. I've done thousands of interviews in my career. And I would say that's in the top 5 for sure, because it's, first of all, you don't normally get to see or read or hear about interviews like that. And they were incredible with me. And then when at the end of the interview, which kind of ended because their evening call to prayer happened, then they were like, well, come up. And I'm like, well, you know, I don't want to intrude, and it's your prayer. And I don't understand the prayer. That was my first time I'd ever been in a mosque. It was absolutely beautiful. They're like, nope, you come up. So they led me upstairs and gave me a chair, and I sat at the back of the mosque, and they did their evening prayer. It was beautiful. They gave me letters and cards that people from all over the world had sent to look at, to show the outpouring of love and empathy to the family. All of these were passed on to the family. They couldn't keep up with it. It was just like emails and cards and letters. It's thousands and thousands of them. So they were so open. And I think you know, sending these messages out to the community is really, really important. And it shows you where we are today as a community, that even though in the Muslim faith, they have taken definitely heat from some people, but they give out love, right? So even in this really difficult time that they went through, that they still put it out as, you know, everyone's welcome at the funeral. You're welcome to come in and talk to us at the mosque. You're welcome to come to our prayer session. I mean, it really is a beautiful message.
It definitely is. And that chapter in particular just struck me so hard. I just appreciated it so much.
Thank you for that.
So for me, one of the key messages of this book is about reevaluating one's life after tragedy. So not just in terms of the necessary healing process, but also the changes a person goes through during that healing process. So I'm kind of wondering if I can ask you what changed for you in writing this book, and what do you hope might change for people who read your book?
That's a great question. And what has changed for me? I mean, I think that I cut myself some slack a little more than I used to, which is why you're seeing me approach things this year the way that I am, because I would never, I'm a dog with a bone. Anybody who knows that since I was a kid journalist, I'm just one of those people. Like I will phone someone 25 times a day. I will phone and phone. I'm one of the old school people, right? Like, okay, you can text and email, but people can dodge you. I will stay on something until I get what I need. And so, for example, with trying to track down Jason Cochran, took me the 911 operator caller, emergency dispatcher. I mean, that took me over a year and a half. Like if I have like I will wait for the long end game. I will. So I think that just being a little softer and kinder with yourself, that it's okay if it takes, like if I have a book now that takes me an extra year, it's going to be okay, Janice, So I think that, yeah, it's just, when you get kind of hit in the gut a few times, it's like, it puts into perspective what's really important for you. I don't have, because, I am getting a little older. I'll be honest with you, I'm 58 years old. Things that were really important to me earlier in my life aren't as important anymore. So my priority has always been my family. It's why I work the way I do. I used to work in television full time. When my baby was born, Laura, who's now doing her master's, I left my work so I could spend more time. I could have more control over my time or projects and be with my daughter. And us as a unit, it's still my priority. And I think it makes me a better writer, right? So I think that finding those spaces, that's hard to do, right? But finding those little spaces sometimes can be forced on you by a jarring event. So if it's a health complication or a loss, a marriage breaking up, it could be anything that ends or begins, whether you like it or not, it really forces you to evaluate what's important. And I mean, if you told me my late parents were in Truro, which is an hour from me, right now, I would get up and run to Truro. I would walk to Truro to see my parents again. Because time is time with our people, with whoever your people are. It doesn't get any more important than that. And my work is hugely important to me. I think you can get a sense of that by what I write and how I talk about it. But you're not going to be good at anything if you don't leave space for the stuff that really is the most important thing in life, right? And I think that I've learned that because I was there when my mom died. I was there when my dad died. I feel very privileged for that because many people don't get that opportunity. It's very difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I realize that that's something that, this is going to sound odd to some people, it's a gift that I could be there with them in their final moments. And I know that. But you learn some tough lessons from those things. And so I will always prioritize. And anybody who knows me well, like my close people, know that my family and close friends who are like family, they get top dollar. So, and everything else falls into line. And that really, really has helped me stay focused in trying to help other people, which is really at this stage in my career, what I'm trying to do. I always feel like there's got to be one person I'm connecting with. And I'm very grateful and humbled that over the years I've gotten private and public messages from people that have read any number of the books who've told me, like, I thank you so much for either advocating for us. We don't have that voice to advocate for ourselves. We know you're out there. Thank you. Or tackling these. We know this is hard to do, for tackling this subject matter. So, I mean, I'm really inspired and buoyed by that.
That's just amazing. And it does come through both in your writing and also talking to you today. It's very clear that that's guiding you in your life, and it's amazing.
Thank you. Don't make me
Um,
cry. Don't make me cry. I'm a crier. I've just had a migraine for 3 days. I could be close to tears at any moment. I'm
I
just
know the
joking.
feeling.
Yeah, we're a great
Um,
group.
so another key message that I got from your book, which is in the chapter about Officer Sampson, is the importance of going to therapy, which as someone with severe mental illness, I truly believe as well. So in that chapter, you're interviewing Officer Sampson, whose watercolor painting of 7 Hearts, which she painted for the Barho children immediately after they lost their lives in the house fire. She emphasizes this need for therapy. And given our collective experience of the global pandemic, this seems even more important these days. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the importance of therapy and what you think maybe are barriers to therapy for people.
Well, I first of all, I commend the officer for even saying that, because if you go back, when I used to be a crime reporter, right? So I spent a lot of time around crime scenes, and police officers knew a lot of them. And there was just no talk of it's the same thing with Dad with the firefighters. It's not just police, it's just, this is the way it was, right? I mean, people have to accept that. There was like no talk about, oh, well, I go to therapy, like, and now I'm having a coffee. It's like, just almost like nothing, just discuss it. But when that officer said that, that was the way that they delivered that message. It was very casual. And I thought you talked about, I like to show how people say things, because that is really important in the art of interviewing. Interviewing is my absolute favorite part of what I do. And it is an art form. And when they said that, it was just, they also tell their peers to do the same. I tell them I go to therapy. I think that they should go to therapy. And so they're really an advocate for it. This is, to me, a huge thing that says where we are today. So I think that was, you're right, you picked up on that, a big key message in there, that they're so open about it and suggest all the time to the other people they serve with to do the same. So, there's a firefighter assistance program. The person who formerly ran it for fire was named Paul McKenzie, who's one of the biggest supporters of this in Canada. And, this is really a huge thing for people who deploy now, is to have this. They know that someone has their back. So for example, with the Barho fire, the acronym for this is FAP, FFAP, for Halifax fire. A number of the FAP members who volunteer their time, right? So in their off-duty hours, if something bad happens, they can get called to a scene to assist the other firefighters who are working and serving. And that happened at the Barho fire, because they knew immediately it was multiple casualty scene, it was going to be bad. And so they deployed the members there. And so this is something that you're seeing now in a lot of different cases, institutions, organizations, where we do have access. Now with FAP, it's all confidential. So for example, if somebody was at a fire today and they thought, maybe I'd like to talk to someone, you contact FAP, and then they have like a little, let's say, a connectivity again to a number of therapists and stuff in the metro area or wherever the station is. And they put them in touch with different therapists. I would say confidentiality is a huge thing. That whatever organization may be considering and could be listening to this interview that wants to make this available for their staff, that staff have to know that if they come forward asking for assistance, that it will be confidential. That their buddy down this hall isn't going to know, oh, well, Joe's going to go see someone. That's not going to work, right? If you want to if you choose to reach out, which is great, that that it will be totally in confidence. So I think confidentiality is a huge thing in setting up these support systems. And the thing is, if you're talking about blockage of getting help, well, for sure we know that's an issue, because their wait lists are ridiculous. So even Dr. Alan Abbas at Dalhousie with the Center of Emotions said the wait list for him was so long. He said that to me in the interview. It's in the book. That people, now I can't talk about today, the book I interviewed him more than a year ago. But the wait list was so long, people were referring to him. And other physicians I've talked to have said the same. So there's definitely a need in Canada and / globally for better access to therapy and other resources for people who are struggling. Because if you do make the decision, right? Think about it. You do make the decision, yeah, maybe I do want to. That's massive itself. And then you go to try to get the help and, oh, no, sorry, you're going to have to wait a year. Well, excuse my language, but that's bullshit. That's bullshit to me. And it's not good enough. And it comes back to my call to action at the end of the book. When we know better, we have to do better. And it's why I call on all levels of government for better funding for these support systems. It's always been one of my call to actions, and it always will be.
I couldn't agree more. It's so clear everywhere across Canada and probably globally that access is one of the major issues. And that it is a big barrier. And you're absolutely right. Once you make that decision that you do need to see someone, you're probably at a point where you need to see someone like yesterday.
Yes.
And to have to wait, I've heard of longer than a year even, to get the help you need. Even with private practice, there are waiting lists. Even if you can afford to pay for private practice, which most people can't, there's still waiting lists. It's not acceptable. And I totally agree with you that it's upon all the levels of government to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a global crisis for me. This is not, something that's a talking point in a book. These are people's lives. So when I, again, the responsibility factor here is huge, and I start to get angry, as you can see. I feel really passionate about this. When I talk to people, this isn't a story for me. This is people recounting their lives, some of the most difficult things, to try to help others. They're always doing it to try to help other people because they're good people. They're a part of this collective, our term, the collective. So it's just outrageous to me. It's not good enough. It's insulting and it's hurtful, and it can be damaging, right? I mean, who knows where that person are they falling through the cracks? God forbid, we've seen headlines of people who die. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is huge. This is an absolute urgent priority in our society today. And we have just come through a global pandemic, and this is discussed in the book, where helplines, et cetera, were absolutely ringing off the hook, including youth. Right? The youth were having a very difficult time. They couldn't connect in schools, et cetera, trying to learn online. The parents were trying to be the teachers. The teachers couldn't teach the kids. This is a huge ripple effect, right? This isn't just one segment of society. But, we won't know. They'll be studying now, right? The researchers will be studying now the fallout effect of what we've just gone through for the last number of years. So we can't let up steam here. I mean, we've just gone through, to me, one of the most difficult times in my life. It was very, very difficult. So we have to keep the pressure up on government, on the people who have access to the funds, that mental health has to be a top priority. Everything falls down from that, right? We have to have each other's backs. We have to have that hope out there that if you decide to reach out for help, that the help will be there, right? That you're not alone. That's the whole point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's not like the pandemic is even over. I mean,
exactly.
It's in a different stage, but it's still happening.
Totally.
And I think people still need those supports.
They do.
Yeah. So I was going to tell you about a couple of chapters that really, really spoke to me. So I absolutely loved the chapter on Officer Sampson. But I was also really struck by the chapter about Dr. Alan Abbas. So he's the psychiatrist and researcher and author and professor at Dalhousie. And then the two chapters about Mi'kmaq elder Joe Michael and his healing lodge, which he built to host healing circles following the mass shootings in Nova Scotia. These are two incredibly different people following very different paths toward healing and community, but they're both really incredibly powerful in their dedication to mental health and processes of healing. I just wonder if you can talk about their approaches and how they've impacted you and the wider communities they serve.
one of the things that really hit me about Dr. Abbas's chapter was him talking about the importance of having that one person building resiliency, or let's say going through a trauma, something really bad in your life, right? What he basically says, and I mean, there's a lot of information in that chapter, but a key learning for me was that if you have one person in your life, and the younger you are, the better. And that person doesn't have to be a parent figure. It could be a mentor, it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a next door neighbor, it could be anyone. If you have that one person that really authentically believes in you and supports you, that later in your life, when something bad happens to you, you're far more able to address it and deal with it and put it in its place or whatever. And that in his studies, which he's done for decades and is a global leader in this, he sees that the people that were, let's say, abandoned or they were abused and I mean, we're talking very young people, like infants, children, that he then sees these people later in life, right? So again, when I wrote that chapter, and I sometimes will post about this still on social media because that hit me so hard, is that you might not have had that, not you, but people, you, the person reading this or listening, may not have had that person in their life. And you might be bitter about it, right? I can understand that. I can understand why you still would be. But you know, right? You know that you can be that person for someone else. And I had a person I know who wasn't raised by their parents and was raised by their grandmother. And this person went on to be an incredible parent because of the way the grandmother was with him. He was an incredible parent himself later in his life because he had that one person. It wasn't his original parent team. It sticks with me. It's like, yes, you might not have had it yourself, and that causes you extreme pain, but you will find more peace by being that for someone else and offering that to another person. When we know better, we have to do better. So that's a huge learning in that chapter from Dr. Abbas is one person can really make a difference. It doesn't have to be that you have a whole village around you, although that's the actual name of his chapter, and he explains why in the book. But it can be simply one person. And I think that's really, really an important message. Going to Elder Joe Michael, who I just admire so greatly. He is such a gift to Nova Scotians and Canadians in general. And, you know, he built the Healing Lodge on his property, had a number of people come in and help him do that. I was invited down to watch the process of the building of the Healing Lodge, which was a huge honor for me. And then come down again for the opening of the lodge, which was very ceremonial and beautiful and had drumming and it was sharing of food. He had all his paintings. He had done all these paintings for the families of the mass shooting. And then he actually discussed the paintings with me and allowed me to go pick from the big pile of paintings, different ones. And we talked about the meaning behind them. He is truly one of the most beautiful souls I have ever met. I mean that is up there again with one of the top interviews I've ever done, because it's such a rare occurrence to sit with a Mi'kmaq elder and have them, welcome them into your home, go to these two major events, and then privately talk about these paintings. I'm almost speechless about it. It was just beautiful. It brought me to tears. And I wonder, to some extent, why he invited me, because I've met him before, so we know each other. And that interview was actually very healing for me. Reading about that chapter actually brought me to tears. And when I read it, it still brings me to tears. That's the chapter that gets me. Is the chapter with Elder Joe Michael, because he's just, I couldn't say enough about him. He's a gift. He helps so many people. He's still helping many people. So many acts that he does out of love. And and people don't even know about them, right? He's one of those people. He's very visible. Yes, he does a lot of things at the universities and that sort of thing, but he's there in the background in the community all the time doing things. And like Dr. Abbas said, he's that one person for many people, right? He is an example of that, where he puts himself out there and he has the back of many, many people. And he did that for me, right? So I'm extremely honored to have him in the book, and it was a huge privilege.
Yeah, it's an incredible section of the book. And it also speaks to cross community, not just communication, but also processing, healing, understanding, education, all of that, we hear so much about the opposite of that. It's really amazing to see and read about the hope that's involved with people like Elder Joe Michael, who are able to open themselves up, open their land up, open their hearts up, to helping other people for healing processes. It's incredible.
I text, so we text each other now and then. And I texted him about for just checking in as I was doing some editing on the book and stuff. And I said, Elder Joe, I said, is the Healing Lodge still up on your property? Which was really it was a dumb question. I even asked him too, Trini. And he's like, well, basically, I'm just paraphrasing, but he basically said, of course it is, because the healing will always continue. And I should have known that, but I just didn't want to have it come out. And then for some reason, a storm blew it down. I just wanted to make sure that it was still intact on the property. It was still available, because he said in the chapter, people will always be welcome. But he said, yes, the healing will always continue. And he's right. And that's good for people to hear. And I wanted to really raise this, and maybe this is a good way to sort of come to a conclusion here, is we've had so much happen in Atlantic, Canada in the last number of years. And most recently here in Nova Scotia, we had horrible flash floods where people have lost their lives, including children. And then we had fires. We've had a lot. And there was you see these, someone asked me about this before, you see these hashtags like Nova Scotia Strong or New Brunswick Strong or whatever strong. And I get the message, I do. And I'm not poo-pooing the message. But I want people to know that it's okay not to feel strong sometimes. It's exhausting trying to always show up and be strong all the time. And you can't be. So it's okay to be angry or frustrated, or you've had it, or go out and scream at the sky, or whatever you're doing. And I think that's a really valuable thing, because it could make people feel less than. Well, everybody else is doing this, but maybe I should be feeling really strong. Why am I not feeling this way? Is there something wrong with me? Well, no, there's not. You have every right to be tired out or frustrated or hurt or whatever it is, and give yourself space for that. But, come around. We're here. We need you. It's a collective. We need you as part of the collective, whoever you are that's listening or reading this, right? But it's okay to feel that way. And I think, as Elder Joe Michael said, the healing continues. It's a journey and a process.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful sentiment to maybe end on. Although I had other questions about advocacy initiatives and the relationship between your work and your father Baz's experiences. But I also had a question about, you talk in the book about being surprised by the prevalence and presence of art during your interview process. And I just I won't ask you a question about this, but I just want to end by saying that having the reproductions of those paintings and sculptures in the book, for me, was a really important sign of how much creative expression is a necessary or innate human response to tragedy. And I feel like you writing this book is part of that creative expression that's a human response to tragedy. And I feel like the power of creative expression is felt so deeply throughout the book, that it's not surprising to me that art came up over and over again, because it is a huge component of how humanity deals with struggle, right? And the creative process can also be a therapeutic or healing process. And so it does make sense to me that it was just sort of by coincidence coming up again and again for you in your interview processes. So I
Well, it
just
does.
wanted to, yeah,
Yeah,
so
it makes it, I was going to say, it makes you wonder though, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if it was meant to come out. But and in that, and I agree with you totally. And first of all, I've loved art my whole life. I'm a big supporter of music. I love all the arts. I do. And we have to remember that for all the people that do create, looking at the pandemic, I mean, you couldn't go to a show, you couldn't go to an art gallery, you couldn't go to do anything. And people need that outlet. This is hugely important in society, right? It is for the processing of trauma. It is for joy. It is for all of the different emotions. And so for you to tell me that you think that my piece plays some small role in that greater landscape of that is a huge thing for me. And it makes me want to continue. So I thank you. I really thank you for that, because no one has ever really said that to me, and especially somebody of your stature. So thank you so much. I never really thought of it that way before, but it is absolutely part of a journey. It's a part of a journey for me and all the people who participate. Art is hugely essential in all its forms in our society. There is absolutely no question. And if the pandemic didn't prove that, I don't know what does.
absolutely. So I think we'll end there. Thank you so much, Janice, for being so generous with your time and with your stories and with your, I don't know, your loving approach to humanity. It's very inspirational, and I just want to thank you so much.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of my favorite interviews I've done in a long time. You've asked some really, really wonderful questions, probing questions that you've thought about. Like you really, I feel like you're the person that I'm hope when I write for, you're that person, right? You've just shown me that my focus, what I learned as a kid journalist, is perhaps it's working. So it's a good sign for an old fart like me. And I like to laugh. I love humor too. You gotta laugh, because if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. And I do enough of that. So it's all good.
I agree.
Thank you
So,
so much. I really thank you. I couldn't thank you enough.
thank you so much.